Peter, thank you for joining us on the Social Bud podcast. How are you?
Yeah, good. Busy old week, even though we're closed. We always find some things to do.
And Peter, for the viewer and listener that might not be aware of your background, tell us a bit about yourself.
Right. Well, I own with my wife Elaine Lunya. Lunya is a Catalan-inspired deli and restaurant, and we've been going 10 years. And before that, I and Elaine, we had no experience in this industry. This all started off with a visit 25 years plus to Barcelona and falling in love with Catalan food and deciding to give up everything 10 years ago and to create Lunya. We were both, Elaine's a child psychologist, and I was a management consultant in health and social care. So this is completely different to anything we've ever done.
Wow. So it was a big change.
Oh, huge. I mean, I think the thing we did know, we had a love and a passion of food. I knew how to cook, even though it very much is a sort of a very good amateur home cook. And we knew how to run a business. The real basic tenets of never spend more than what's coming in and make sure that what you've got to offer, you've got a way to get it to people and they want what you offer. Really simple tenets, but I think apply to any business. If you don't have those three things in place, you're going to be in trouble.
And you look, when my research team was looking at this and trying to find people, we wanted people from the kind of north who've been really affected by the current situation. And they came across you and your missus. Now, how has the current pandemic affected you guys as a business?
Hugely. Probably the most noticeable change, I think, to the outsiders, we used to have 3 restaurants and we've got 2 now. So we closed our Manchester restaurant in the spring. As we did our calculations, really at the start of lockdown of what's this going to be like when we reopen. What was really clear was, to us at least, was there were going to be restrictions in place until beyond Christmas. And we did some forecasts, and our forecast showed that if we had 3 restaurants all running, losing money, the company would collapse really quickly. So we had to do a very hard-nosed calculation of which restaurant did we predict would lose the most, and therefore which would we close, because we figured we could find a way to exist with 2. But 3 was just too much money pouring down the drain. And Manchester was the one where we had the least supportive landlord. In Liverpool, we had 2 supportive landlords. So we felt very much of let's put our eggs into that basket. And that's going to be our chance for survival. So to the outside, that's probably the big change. But we've become something very, very different as well. Before we had our deli, we had the restaurant and bar. And we had an online shop which had everything on in the deli. So it was big by product, had over 1,000 plus products. But in terms of activity and turnover, it was titchy, really, really titchy. And all of a sudden, it's become this really significant income generator for us. It's grown. At peak, it was growing by about 3,500% a week. And it's steadied at about 1,000% up year on year. So they're big figures. They're big figures from a very small figure. But we now have, in effect, if we want to do a successful standalone online business that we never had, as well as doing lots of other things. Very early on, we had this idea that people would, if they couldn't go out to eat, they'd want to have restaurant standard food at home. So we started to select a couple of our dishes which worked in terms of cooking and freezing, transporting and recooking and reheating at home. And that's proved to be an enormous success as well. You
mentioned something quite interesting, the landlord support. What support did you get from the landlords in Liverpool that you didn't get in Manchester?
Well,
without going into too much
because it's hard because some of this, the reality is, we haven't paid any rent since March, and it's now it's the end of November. Now, we've not even had a discussion about what's happening to that. And I suppose the first support is not expecting us to pay rent there and then when there's no money coming in. When that tap of income gets turned off, there's no money whatsoever in a business to pay any overheads. And they have also agreed with us that there's not much point in discussing what will happen with that money which we haven't paid until this is over. And our hope is we'll come to some compromise where, a significant chunk of it in effect is written off, and then we agree a repayment term for the
Mm.
rest over quite a long period. It's in their interests for us to be really strong and viable. We went into this pandemic as a very successful, strong, viable business. We pay a huge amount of rent. We have done for over the last 10 years. We want to pay that rent for the next 10 years. Our landlords will want us to. And some of that, I think, is all of us having a bit of short-term pain to get that long-term gain of us occupying a great site, paying the rent, and the landlords benefiting from a really good high-profile tenant.
Where was it in Manchester?
We were on Deansgate, a really big, expensive, high-profile location. Barton Arcade, beautiful
Oh yes, I
19th
know.
century arcade. But with a very different landlord. Although the landlord, give them their due, they did agree that we could walk away from a significant lease, but weren't really interested in discussions about long-term support and us staying there. So that's why the decision to stay in Liverpool was, it was a really hard emotional decision to close any part of a business.
Yes,
But
tough.
on a logical level, it was a simple decision to save the two Liverpool businesses and let the Manchester business go.
And how do you think the government's dealt with this, especially for the hospitality sector? I know there's a lot of people have got an opinion on it, but you were somebody that was directly affected. How do you think they've dealt with this?
Well, you see, in some respects, I think they've done some things really well, and in other respects, they've done some things really, really badly. So, I think the introduction of furlough at the end of March was a brilliant thing. It's preserved the income, or the majority, a significant majority of the income of a lot of people who would have been laid off with no pay. I think one of the things which is important to remember about furlough, it's quite often described as business support. It isn't. It's an alternative benefit payment system which the government get employers to pay. So it's benefiting our staff, but in reality, if there wasn't furlough, we'd have had to have laid off 80 staff with no pay for the duration of the. No money comes no money comes to us for that. But it's brilliant, and I wouldn't want to take that away because it's meant our staff have had little worry or anxiety about their income whilst this has been going on. The support to business itself generally has been woeful. The grant support. At the moment, as a closed business, we qualify for £3,000 a month. Now, to put that into context, that's £3,000 a month to cover £62,000 of overheads. So
Every month,
every month, it's a drop in
right?
the ocean. And going back to March, they did introduce a one-off grant for high street retail and hospitality. I'm just saying, I think we would have qualified. We would have got £25,000 grant per site, but your rateable value had to be very, very low. And we were in high-profile sites with rateable values in excess of 100,000. So ironically, we didn't get a penny. So I think on that, it was a really ill-conceived, rushed grant scheme that wasn't thought through, because there's a very strong argument that if you're in a higher rateable value property, your overheads are higher. You need the grant more than someone in a lower rateable value property. It's not a determination.
But they would have looked at it and said, if you're in a high profile area, you've got a lot of money.
That's right. Maybe if we were a big brand with both investors behind us and a long time of the income and profitability and trade that some of the big brands do, I think that would hold. But they use it as a proxy for the size of business, which I guess it'd be the equivalent of trying to determine mine or your size by the car we drive. So I might drive a Fiesta, but I'm a big bloke. You might drive a stretch Humber, but there's a lot of space in it. It was a poor proxy for determining a business in terms of support. Other things have been brilliant. The VAT cut for restaurants, absolutely fantastic, dropping VAT to 5% for restaurant food. The problem is with that, we've been closed or partially closed for most of that period, so we're not doing the trade to benefit from the cut. So we're really hoping that will be extended through to next year, so it really is a big benefit. We predicted back in June when that was announced If we had near normal trade between July and January, that VAT cut would have been the equivalent of £150,000 grant. It would have been fantastic. But because we've been closed, we reckon it's going to be worth the equivalent of about 40,000 or so, which again makes me sound really sort of mealy-mouthed in that, but that's in the context of, if you think £60,000 overheads for now 9 months of closure or partial closure, that's nearly £750,000 of overhead we've had to find from so far a £3,000 grant. So some things have done really well, some things badly. Their communication management has been dreadful. I think one of the most stressful things for us has been the absolute uncertainty and the complete contradiction when news is leaked and you plan for one thing and something else happens, and the timescale of announcement to implementation are really, really dreadful. I'd say the stresses come more from uncertainty, from the reality sometimes of the situation we're in.
We work with one of the biggest Indian buffet restaurants in Europe. You know, 2 sites, each site holds 600 people, employing maybe just under 500 people across 2 restaurants, the scale of it. And what we found was and we're a social media agency, and the support was we were having to change the message every week. Like, we're still open, then it went to 10 o'clock. Then people weren't sure if they had a lot of people coming from different parts of the country into the restaurant. So people weren't sure if they could travel, if they couldn't travel. And you're going into lockdown, you're not going into lockdown, staff were panicking. And what's happening is constantly you're just dealing with problem after problem. As soon as you market one message, the customer understands it, they go into another message. And it was just constant, like you said, the leaks were not helping at all to anybody. Now, what do you think the government should have done then, looking back at it now?
Well, I guess one of the things they should have done is actually had a plan from the scenario planning that they were supposed to have done in the early 2000s, of such a thing. So they at least had a framework in place. What it felt like it was in the middle end of March, a real rush. Now, I can understand you're not going to come up with a perfect system in a rush. And I don't think we were expecting perfection. Clarity around the message early on, and an understanding sometimes of the knock-on implications of what they were saying. So at first they introduced a all or nothing furlough. Flexible furlough came in July. Now, for a business like ours, where we had a very small number of people working throughout because we were doing online and we were doing free meals for NHS as well. So I've had flexible furlough from the beginning would have made a huge difference to us, rather than the people either weren't working or they were. And if you were working, even if you're working half time, we got no government support. We had to meet the full-time salary of those people. I'd have liked to have seen a grant scheme that was based on something more than rateable value. I always think rateable value is a terrible proxy for anything at all. I mean, it's always based on 5 years ago data as well as your alleged rental value of your property. And they could have used it on the basis of your last 2 years filed accounts and profitability or turnover. They've got all this data. HMRC have that, so it would have been just as simple to do that. I think consistency of message would have made the biggest difference. We found ourselves in some strong moral dilemmas because we were expected not just to implement these rules, but to police them as well. So we found ourselves in Liverpool in a situation where the government announcements were all in October. You should only make essential journeys in Liverpool. You shouldn't be going out using public transport apart from essential journeys. And yet we were allowed to be open with restrictions. So we were, in marketing ourselves as being open, in effect, the subtext was we were telling people, look, ignore that essential journey stuff. Come to us. We need you to come in. And that never felt right as a business that we should be in that position. It was either too dangerous to go out, and therefore we should have been closed with a package of support and benefits because we were closed. But for a month we were in this, we described it as like a land of the living dead, where in effect we were closed. Our trade was 75% down in the end. but we were open, because if we were closed, we would get no support at all. And so the little bit of trade we could get was, was, although it was very little, was better than being closed and better than nothing.
Well, when we were in March, if you remember, we closed a
It was
lot
on
later than
Friday
the rest.
20th, wasn't it? Yeah.
And some of our clients were getting messages that you should be closed, you shouldn't be open. Why? You're money hungry, you're this. But what they weren't understanding was, if they would have closed, the business would have took a financial hit because there was no support. You're closing out your own choice. And nobody, as you know, somebody in this sector, you couldn't just shut and not pay the wage, especially when you have overheads, like yourself, such high overheads.
That's
And they
right.
just left.
It's
They
impossible.
left.
If you think back to that time in March, and this is one of the real frustrations about the government and their lack of planning, their announcements for business support and help have come after the fact. So I remember it was I remember it so vividly, week of the 16th of March, when Boris Johnson started to make his announcements. And on Monday night, that first Monday press conference, he was saying, look, you shouldn't be going out, you should be staying at home now. But it was short, and we were all open. By the Wednesday, that announcement had been changed to, you really mustn't go out.
That's
Technically, you're allowed,
correct.
but
Yeah.
you mustn't. And then by the Friday, and I think it was at 6 o'clock on the Friday, he basically said, and basically his message was, look, no one's listening. So at 9 o'clock tonight, every restaurant and bar and shop has to close. And be closed for, until we release these restrictions. And we took the decision on the Wednesday of that week to close, partly because there was so few people out. And it just felt inevitable that we were going to, it was, which day would they make the announcement, Wednesday night, Thursday night, or Friday night, that we closed 2 days before they eventually told everyone to shut. But there came a point where there was virtually no one coming in that last day. But our minimal staffing level meant that our losses were significant. So we just decided that night, we cleaned up, closed up, disposed of our food. We managed to give most of it away. And that was it. It was Wednesday the 18th, I think, that we closed. But their information management of it was just so poor. It left the onus on us, not
Yeah.
on them coming down with very clear rules and instructions. And I felt like the case during October for us. We were told, well, you can still be open, but you're not allowed to have someone coming in to have a drink without a meal. You can't have a mixed household inside. You can't have a table size over 6. Now, in effect, for us, that meant we lost 75% of our trade, because
Yeah.
most restaurant visitors aren't couples who live together. They're extended families, they're groups of friends, and all of a sudden they couldn't come out. And as for a tapas restaurant, one of the joys of tapas is stopping off for a drink and then not being too sure if you're going to have one or you're going to make a night of it. Then you have a nibble, then you have another drink, then you get hungry, so you order a few more dishes. And over the night, you might be there 2 or 3 hours and you've had 3, 4, 5 drinks, 4 or 5, 6 tapas between you. And with those rules, all of that went out the window. So we only got people in who were going in for a very predetermined meal. And it took the joy of dining away. And that's the thing we heard from all of our guests. It was too stressful coming out.
Yeah, it was too stressful. And I knew a restaurant that was, I remember, if you remember, Bolton was one of the first.
That's right.
And this restaurant was asking people that when you booked, they were asking you to show a driving license to show where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it went from an enjoyable experience to like a quite stressful experience. And do you think the Eat Out Help Out scheme benefited or caused more harm to the industry?
If we hadn't have had the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, we would have had a brilliant August no matter what. So we had a very strong July. Liverpool's got this real vibrant visitor economy, tourism-based industry. And we lost all of our international tourists, but they were replaced by a bigger number of British staycationers, of people just coming out, making a week's visit to Liverpool, or a 3 or 4 day break. So we'd have had a brilliant August anyway. And in some respects, Eat Out to Help Out felt like a government-funded infection program. That's what, that's what it seemed to be. We benefited financially from it, no doubt. That the spend per head shot up because people had, £10 of their meal funded. Because in reality, I think over the whole of August, for each 3 days of the week that Eat Out was running, I think we only had 2 or 3 tables who spent less than £10 a head. So £20 a head. So everyone got that £10 sort of government. We got the £10 government funding, so it brought money in. But it isn't just with hindsight, because I remember us having this conversation of this would be so much better if it was spread over 3 months, so it didn't give you this huge peak and spike in August when, for us, trade was going to be good anyway. And encourage people to come out in smaller numbers. Our experience was we had a lot of people who would come out once or twice a week to get the deal, and it encouraged people to come out a lot more than they should. Now, we've never ever had a reported instance of any COVID infection in our restaurant amongst our staff or amongst our guests, any reporting through track and trace or public health. It could have happened because the quality of track and trace is pretty woeful, but we've never ever had one. And it did feel that even if restaurants were safe, the journey to a restaurant isn't. Getting the bus, the underground, the taxi, getting in a car park and a lift, touching the lift button. They're all places where people can get infected. And that, to me, it was ill-conceived to do something that condensed people into a very narrow window of time and not stretch it out so people didn't worry about losing out on the deal. And we'd have had, I think, a much slower infection rate in the UK without the spike we've had.
I think what they should have done was they should have, I agree, August would have been busy. Everybody was coming back after a long lockdown. What they should have done was, in my opinion, they should have maybe done 10% off on a Monday for 1 day, see how it goes, then maybe extend it for 2 days the following month, then just slowly extended it over a longer period to benefit, because it was just like, it's only on for 30 days, go out and get it, and it just caused a lot of problems. I know certain places that were just hammered, they just could not stop people coming. Even if then, like I said, the government would then say, well, they can't queue outside, they can't wait outside. That's your footpath area, you control it. But they were saying we can't control it because it doesn't fall in our. We're creating a lot of grey areas. But look, you live and learn from it. What changes do you think need to be made for the hospitality industry to survive going forward?
Broadly, I think that there's been this huge expansion over the last 10 years all over the country in restaurants and bars, and certainly in some places, I would argue Manchester's one of them. It got beyond saturation. There were too many. There were 10 Spanish restaurants in Manchester. In effect, 8, 9 of them all along one street. And there's been a cull of those now. I think it's down to 4 Spanish restaurants now in Manchester. So I think that there is a natural contraction, which if you can survive, you're going to benefit from. And that's our hope in Liverpool, that, we've seen that already. There's places that are closing. I think one of the problems with the intense competition has been that the margins in restaurants are just ridiculously low. They're not enough to have that successful and viable a business at the moment, and I'd argue they haven't been for the last year or two. There does need to be some resetting of that, where if you're serving great food, you can charge a price commensurate with that. You can charge a price that allows you to pay people more than minimum wage to serve and cook the food. And I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out from the pandemic is a resetting of that enables that. With less intense competition, you've got some opportunity to do some very moderate price increases, which enable you to improve your margins and also to pay better. Because I think it's shocking. We've got an industry which is based on minimum wage, and no matter what the business in this industry, we've all got a huge chunk of staff who are at or very near minimum wage, and that's no way for an industry to grow and to be professional and to attract the very, very best talent in the UK. So I think that's one thing which really needs to change. Allied to that, for me, is trying to change the tips culture. We can never argue that we're a professional industry if we're relying on people's remuneration based on the goodwill of someone slipping someone a couple of pounds after their meal, you couldn't imagine that happening in a hospital when the surgeon has just operated on your mum and done a really good job with putting their new knee in, and you just have you just see them as they're going out the door and say, "Here, doc, here's £50. You've done a great job." And because it's interesting, and actually we always laugh about, well, that's a mad idea, and yet we think it's acceptable to slip some money to someone who's served us the meal. And I think till that changes, we're not going to have the strong professional industry that we need. And I guess the third thing is something's got to happen about high street rents. We pay in our big Liverpool site, and the figures were virtually identical in our big Manchester site, with rent, service charge and rates, we were paying just short of £300,000 a year each. They're huge amounts, and especially now with the drop in trade and the likely continue to drop in trade and high street footfall, something needs to be done to reset those rents. We're tied into a 16 years left of a 20-year upward only rent review lease. That can't go on in this day and age with the decline in city centre footfall. It's just not tenable. But how that's resolved, I don't know. But it's something government needs to get involved in and address the business rates. Property as a basis for tax, for me, is lousy. I would much rather have seen the government put really good amounts of financial support into our industry and then clobber us with corporation tax. Corporation tax you pay out of profits. If you're making the money, you can pay the tax. With property rates, you don't. If you're losing money, you still have to pay your tax, and that's a really unfair form of taxation for a business.
Do you see more restaurants closing in 2021?
Yes, my guess would be that I'd be surprised if anywhere reopens at the beginning of December. My guess is we'll have a lockdown release like the spring, where probably non-essential shops will be able to open at the beginning of December. And maybe restaurants and bars might be able to open later in December, or maybe we'll be kept closed till well into the new year. But whatever happens, the fragility which is there anyway every January and February when trade really drops, that's going to be so exacerbated by not having a normal December. I'd be amazed if we'd see anything less than 25% of our industry disappear in the new year. Everyone's, on the breadline at the moment. If you did have cash reserves, they've long gone. We're reasonably confident about ourselves because we've been able to maintain an online business through lockdown, which has at least enabled us to meet most of our overheads and keep all of our suppliers paid. But if we didn't have that, we would have gone under back in April. We wouldn't have seen out the spring. But most restaurants aren't in that lucky position of having that online type of trade, because it's significant for us now. It's like having a third small restaurant open. That's how significant it is.
So who benefits from restaurants closing then? Who's going to, is it Uber? Is it?
Yes, I think you'll see there is a shift already to that sort of delivered takeaway. I mean, my fear with that, we do delivered takeaway. We've avoided the Deliveroo, Uber and Just Eat because we cannot sacrifice 30 to 35% of our margin. We do it with our own app and we use local taxi drivers. The problem is we don't do the level of trade we would do under Uber or Deliveroo, but we think we make more money from a much reduced number as a consequence. The other beneficiary, I think, is going to be there's going to be some very viable, successful sites and businesses that have just run out of cash and gone under that will be snapped up by investor-backed, I think, small restaurant groups who will be, who will get the benefit of the trade which someone's built up over years. And I think the squeeze is going to be on the smaller independents because I think they're possibly more likely to run out of cash more quickly or not have the benefit of investors maybe putting some money in to see things through. And that's my fear, is that, in effect, I guess what always happens in a significant downturn is that the wealthy get wealthier because they're able to snap up the misfortune of the less wealthy and benefit from it as time goes on.
And somebody somebody in the restaurant trade or takeout trade somebody a lot smaller, what advice would you give them for business advice going forward, into next year, to December?
Operating out through the, but I would say to plan for at least another 6, 7, 8 months of significant impact on trade, where either that's government imposed restrictions or people being wary about going out, and to really plan for that and to get all your costs and overheads down. I think you've got to keep engaged with landlords. We've not agreed anything yet, but at least we're not getting pressed for that. I think the biggest bit of learning that we've done is we've really kept in touch with our customer base. When we opened in 2010, one of the things we did was every diner was given this small little feedback card to tell us what the meal was like, and to leave their name and address, and then they could take it and go and get a discount in the deli. Over 10 years, we've collected 57,000 email addresses, and every week we email out to them, tell them what we're doing, tell them how people can support us. And that's kept us going. It feels a bit like the life of Brian at times, where he was stood out the window shouting instructions and everyone did whatever they said. If we write to our customers and tell them we've got these fantastic smoked sardines in, and give them a go. If you want to support us, buy some of the sardines we brought in. We sell out, and that's the way we keep going, is keeping our customers engaged. People aren't now just coming out for a meal with us when we're open, or they're not just doing an online order. They're doing it because they want to make sure we're here for the future. And I think that's been our biggest learning, is to really keep up that very high level of customer engagement. Not selling at times, but telling your story. We tell people when we've had a good week, a bad week, when we've been really scared, when we've had an idea, when we've been frustrated at something the government's done. We just keep in touch, and we find people are fascinated by that. I always think every person is a potential latent restaurateur. It's lots of people's sort of distant dream, which never happens, of opening a bar or a restaurant. And I think people like to live their dream through someone else and hearing about someone else's experience without taking any risk. And I think that's what we've learned, is that constant customer engagement has been fabulous for us. It's turned our customers into fans. And when someone becomes a fan, they forgive that moment when at some point you're going to get something wrong. If you support a football team and they get beat, you might get angry that they've got beaten, but you don't stop supporting them. And I think it's like that with the business. When your customers become fans, that time when, I don't know, it takes too long to get the coffee to the table, or they ordered 3 bottles of wine and you send them 1 through your online shop, fans forgive you for that. And you get a second chance. And that's what it's enabled us to do, is to have this really broad fan base, which has kept us going.
Yeah, it's nobody knows the right answer. It's difficult because, as you know, when you run a restaurant, your team's quite close. It's like family. Nobody wants to lay anybody off. And then you've got the issue with the government. And I think everybody is just, like you said, plan well ahead, plan for the worst. And that should get you through. Now, if anybody wants to reach out to you, Peter, kind of connect with you, how can they do that?
Right. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Peter Kinsella. They can follow me on Twitter, and my handle is just Lunya, Lunya on Twitter, Lunya Deli on Instagram. Visit our website, lunya.co.uk, and there's a contact form there. It's all under Lunya, but it's me, very, very active on social media. It's a great way to keep in touch. And it's a great way to keep yourselves in front of people when you're closed, because I think that's so important. People don't forget about you and do remember you, and have a bit of fun as well on social media. It doesn't need to be serious.
Peter, I really wish you all the best. And I hope, and I know you'll get through this. And I hope you have multiple sites in going forward, because we need positive people like you. We need the right people in the hospitality sector who can help lead. And genuinely, I really hope you guys do really well. And when everything's all done, we'll come and shoot a podcast at one of your places, and it'll be great to sit down with you and your missus.
And great podcast, by the way. Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you,
That's it.
Peter, for that.
It's all pleasure.
It
Lovely
was
to
a
meet you.
pleasure. Look, I
Mhm.
was genuine there. It is tough. It's tough. But
Oh,
the other
mhm.
problem you've got at the moment, Peter, is you've got a lot of people claiming to be experts in hospitality, giving the wrong kind of advice. And one of the reasons we wanted you on was when we looked into it was you're actually going through it. You've got multiple sites, so the advice you could give would be very valuable. And that's why I kind of went straight into the questions rather than going more about you went, how did your restaurant start? Because at the moment,
Mhm.
people just want valuable information.
Sure.
And like I said, when we can, we will come down and meet you guys.
Fantastic. Whereabouts are you
But
based?
we're not far from you where your restaurant was in Deansgate.
All right.
We're just next to St Anne Square, further back.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so I know where you were. When you
Mm.
opened, I saw where you were.
Yeah, it's
Um,
still empty. That's a crazy thing, you know, that landlord has forgone. Yeah, they're having to pay rates because it's empty, but they were so pig-headed.
Yeah, and that's the problem you've got. Manchester's very competitive. As you know, there's
Mm.
building work everywhere. Everybody wants a piece of the action. People are coming in from far and wide to get involved in Manchester. There's a really popular Spanish restaurant in Spinning Fields I went into. Further back it was, and that
In
closed down
America.
as well. Yes.
Yes, yeah. No, they've closed. I think they've kept some of their London sites open, but I think all their provincial sites have gone.
Yeah, and that was really nice inside.
Mhm.
And it's just a shame, but look, I'm sure we'll get through this and everything will work out for the better.
Yeah. Well, great to talk to you anyway, and
You
thanks for the
too.
opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. All the
Cheers,
best.
man.